Brian Billick yesterday. Also, he's a Super Bowl champion coach for the Baltimore Ravens. Via Skype on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline. Who needs it more? BYU or Utah? Here is that conversation. If you don't already, I highly encourage following him at Coach Billick on Twitter and on Facebook. All sorts of football gems there for you to become smarter football fans. Coach, great to have you with us. BYU and Utah State, a rivalry that you have played and or coached on both sides. What is BYU-Utah State like, and what comes to the top of your mind when you think about that rivalry showdown?
Well, obviously, it's different when I was playing. The rivalry with Utah was much more intense. We didn't play Utah State on a regular basis. Utah State, way back then, and I'm going to date myself here, back then, really was a heck of a program. You go back to the Olsen brothers, Tony Knapp throwing the ball all over the place, Coach Knapp in terms of they were pretty inventive at the time. So it was exciting football. And obviously, it changed, obviously, as we got into the 80s and 90s. And when I was there, obviously, we were just kind of building it together. Brent Snyder, the last 2 years I was there, we were one of the top passing offenses in the country. So that was kind of exciting when you're playing BYU and the Heritage. We never beat them when I was the coordinator at Utah State. So, yeah, the rivalry, it is a rivalry at every sense of the term, and obviously very much so in basketball. Very heated in Cache Valley. They wanted so much to beat BYU. I'm not sure from the BYU standpoint, because it was more dominant on that side, that you thought of Utah State in those terms of in terms of being a very heated rivalry.
Describe to us what it was like to be on both sides of this, as you mentioned. So you played at BYU, but you were a graduate assistant at BYU and the offensive coordinator at Utah State. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a great time. I loved it. In Cache Valley, you come up Sardine Canyon and come down to Cache Valley. It's just gorgeous. Loved being at the school. Very intimate setting in terms of the stadium. You're kind of scrambling from the bottom up, trying to compete with BYU with resources, recruits, that type of thing, whether it's in Utah, whether it's in California, where we recruited very heavily. We relied a little bit more on the JC market. So, yeah, it was clearly our fans very much wanted to beat BYU, didn't understand why we couldn't beat BYU. Until I'd say, well, you tell you what, walk through their facility and then walk through our facility, and you're going to see real readily why it's a little tougher. Although we beat Utah twice when I was there, so obviously Utah was a big rivalry as well. Probably a little more heated because it was a little more balanced than it was when we were trying to beat the Cougars.
The rhetoric in 2017, because of what has transpired with BYU football, is this is a linchpin game. BYU really needs this game. Obviously, Utah State always wants to beat BYU for the reasons that you have shared. So this year, who is the game bigger for, Utah State or BYU?
Well, yeah, when you're coming from where BYU is right now, you desperately need the win. Of course, Utah State would say the same thing, and they feel like they really have a chance to beat BYU. So from that standpoint, probably maybe a little bit bigger for Utah State. Coach Sataki wouldn't say that because you got to have a win, and you can't lose the in-state rivalries. And the fact that Utah State thinks that they can actually do that this year, they're probably putting a little more pressure on themselves this year.
BYU at 1-3, trying to get the offense jump-started, has had a bye week, has been able to heal up. BYU's last in the country, Brian, in points per game, which is crazy when you consider the offensive juggernauts that have come out of here. So what do you expect this Friday from BYU as they try and get the offense going against a team that isn't ranked in the top 25 like the previous three teams?
Yeah, and that's certainly going to be a factor. The matchup certainly should favor BYU.
We'll get back to Brian Billick in just a bit, the Super Bowl champion coach on the BYU-Utah State rivalry, joining us on Skype via the Deseret First Credit Union hotline. I thought it was interesting when I asked him who needs it more, because I thought for sure he would say, oh, it's BYU because they're 1-3.
But then it means a lot to Utah State.
But because of what it means, and because BYU is only a 2-point favorite in Logan.
Now 1.5.
There's this 1.5. There's this expectation that, we've got a great chance to beat BYU, so they're that much hungrier to beat the Cougars.
Listen, we're going to talk to Brian Logan coming up about this situation. 1-3, desperate, thinking about changes wherever you can find them to be the best you can be and snap out of it, going to Logan. This happened in 2010.
This exact scenario.
And BYU lost that game. Now, I feel like BYU's defense is in a better position to rise to the occasion in this situation, keep BYU in that game. BYU gave up 31 points in that game.
Only scored 16.
Only scored 16. That was a young Jake Heap struggling to kind of find his footing. I think Bo Hodge in this situation, first career road start in Logan. There he is. That crowd is crazy. It's Christmas in Logan for those fans. It's a big game for BYU, and BYU's coming from a desperate place, right? At 1-3, ready to prove itself.
Stadium capacity only 22,000, but they are hostile.
Listen, can BYU fans and people stop talking about capacity and what that may be perceived? I'm not saying you are, but the whole St. Mary's owned BYU, and it doesn't matter the size of the gym, okay? The Kennel is 6,000. They went to the national championship game. Like, the size of the venue doesn't matter.
The hostility and the volume are very, very real in Logan.
We think, like, population of stadium will affect a game in a great way or something? Like, yes, but...
It's volume and how engaged. Like, everybody that's at that game is 100% engaged in what is happening on the field. There is an advantage to that, right?
No one's knitting.
They are focused on what is on the field. Okay, as promised, we now go back to our interview with the Super Bowl champion coach, Brian Billick. Played at BYU, coached at BYU, then was the offensive coordinator at Utah State. If there's a guy that understands this rivalry, it's him. Enjoy the rest of the interview.
BYU at 1-3, trying to get the offense jump-started, has had a bye week, has been able to heal up. BYU's last in the country, Brian, in points per game, which is crazy when you consider the offensive juggernauts that have come out of here. So what do you expect this Friday from BYU as they try and get the offense going against a team that isn't ranked in the top 25 like the previous three teams?
Yeah, and that's certainly going to be a factor. The matchups certainly should favor BYU a little bit better this week than the previous weeks. I imagine they're going to want to do what they had in mind coming in. They want a little bit of balance. They certainly want to be able to run the ball. Can't turn the ball over against anybody, top 25 team or otherwise. And with regards to the defense, I think the bottom line is you can't give up the big play. You can't let Utah stay around by coming up with big plays. If they can go the length of the field in 10, 12 play drives, okay, so be it. But make them do that as opposed to giving up the big plays.
As a coach, what are you looking for from your team coming off of a bye week?
You know, I'm looking for a lot of emotion. Basically, kind of survive the early going, survive the storm, as we used to say, because there's going to be a little bit of rust, getting back into that groove. You don't want to let the mistakes early because you haven't played in a couple of weeks. Don't beat yourself. Let the emotion of getting back on the field kind of subside and get back into it from that standpoint. Don't get too high, don't get too low, and let the game kind of come to you, and mainly try to minimize mistakes, having not been in a game for a couple weeks.
BYU has made some mistakes on offense. They haven't created too many mistakes, if you will, too much havoc, takeaways, sacks, tackles for loss. On defense as much. Your Ravens teams were known for wreaking havoc all over the field. What role do you think that could play for the BYU defense to help the offense?
Yeah, our guys always kind of bristled up when I would talk about giveaways. They go, no, coach, they're takeaways. We don't let anything be given to us. We're going to go get takeaways, and that has to be kind of the mentality to a degree. Now you got to be smart about it. Can't be haphazard about it. You know, even fast break basketball has to have a plan to it. We always used to say. So yeah, you got to pick your spots, see where you're going to get it done. The coaches have to make it very clear where those are going to come from in terms of the defense. You know, every defense it has a weakness. And there are some things that, you know, it's kind of, okay, this defense stops this and this. And if they throw the ball in the flat, fine, guys, they get that, because that's not what this defense is built for. And there's some more aggressive defenses going, we got to make this happen. We got to get pressure, got to get the ball out quick. If we don't, and the quarterback gets the ball down the field, then that's our fault on the front seven. You know, it typically goes to the adage that the front seven's job is to make the quarterback throw the ball quickly to help the secondary. The secondary matches up to make the quarterback hold the ball so your front seven can get home.
What is the number one indicator that BYU's offense has improved during the bye week for you, Coach?
To me, you know, in football today, it's about big plays and turnovers. You know, you need not only generate big plays, but you can't give them up. You can't turn the ball over, yet you have to generate them. So that would be the biggest thing. Can we generate some big plays, and are we not turning the ball over? Those two things means we don't make those mistakes, either on offensively or defensively in terms of turnovers, and we're generating some big plays that maybe we haven't before.
Let's talk about some of the Cougars in the NFL. Really good week for a couple guys on the defensive side of the ball. Kyle Van Noy, 11 tackles, a career high. Daniel Sorensen, 8 tackles, including like a forearm shiver on one tackle, which was crazy. Which was the more impressive performance to you by Kyle Van Noy with the Patriots or Daniel Sorensen with the Chiefs?
Well, they're both great, but that Chief defense is playing pretty good. In fact, on my show Playbook, which is on Wednesdays on the NFL Network at 6 o'clock, I'm going to show an interception that's the consummate Kansas City Chiefs. Pressure on the quarterback, Phillip Rivers, a corner that literally drops the deep route and robs and steals an interception on an underneath route. And that's what Kansas City's all about. And it brings it all together. The pressure from the front seven, Marcus Peters, the corner, breaking coverage and getting the turnovers. We just talked about the importance of generating those turnovers. Comes out of the structure of the defense to do it. Really brilliant. In terms of New England, obviously they held on enough. It was all about Tom Brady and obviously, going the length of the field. The defense is still struggling a little bit, and they're going to continue to be tested. Houston and Deshaun Watson, although I've got to tell you, I've been doing this for 40 years. I watch all the games. I've got the Sunday ticket, and I'm watching all the games, and the New England game is on. And my wife of 40 years, who's been around a little bit of football, she just kind of passes through. Well, she's coming through just as New England has the ball with 1 minute and 30 seconds left. They're down. They've got to go the length of the field. And in her, brilliant, infinite wisdom, as she walked by, looked, saw the minute 30, saw it was Tom Brady, and went, Houston's dead. They're beat. And didn't even stick around to see the game, just kept walking, because she knew Tom Brady, minute 30, that's too much time. You're going to get beat.
Oh, fantastic stuff with the coach, Brian Billick. A short week for the Green Bay Packers, and I know that Thursday night games are not looked upon kindly by many of the players and coaches that have to deal with them. But for Green Bay, does that mean less Ty Montgomery and more Jamal Williams just to kind of spare his body?
It could, in that combination, and the fact that Detroit, you want to be able to run the ball, as Green Bay's been trying to do. Now, at the end of the day, it's Rodgers. The end of that game as well. Rodgers up and down the field, just brilliant in what he was able to do. You kind of knew that was going to happen. But they want to run the ball on a short week. You want to be able to do more of that. Ty Montgomery, you're exactly right. A little more physical running game, particularly against that Detroit defense. Of course, Ziggy Ansah, the BYU fans are following him. He's having a brilliant year. So we could see more of Jamal Williams this week as part of the game plan.
Coach, we look forward to your show, Playbook, NFL Network, every Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Do not miss it, and we appreciate the time.
All right, guys, very good.
Brian Billick on the Deseret.